Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 10 of the Delhi edition. This column, written by Chapal Mehra, a public health activist, has been brought out in the context of the Pride Month that was marked recently, which is held to celebrate sexual diversity and to highlight the issues faced by the LGBTQIA community. See, the common term LGBTQ is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. It's an umbrella term for non straight people or homosexual people, including those who have a fluid gender identity, and also covers a diverse set of sexual orientations. The term lesbian and gay refers to homosexual woman or man, respectively, who are attracted to someone from their own gender. Bisexual refers to someone who is attracted to another person from either of the gender. The term transgender again is a very broad term and includes those who have a different sexual identity as compared to the sex that they were assigned at birth. So, in general, these communities constitute a sexual minority and they're broadly referred to by the term LGBTQ. But of late, this term has been further expanded to include a wide variety of sexual minorities, along with those who have a very fluid gender identity and sexual orientation. Today, the term has been expanded to include intersex groups and asexual groups, and this has led to the expansion of the acronym, which is referred to as LGBTQIA community. See, historically, societies around the world, they've seen gender and sexual orientation from a very narrow perspective, and they've adopted a very binary interpretation. So, in a traditional sense, gender usually refers to just man or woman, and only a straight heterosexual orientation involving sexual attraction and intercourse between a man and woman has been accepted as the norm by societies around the world. This orthodox interpretation has led to centuries of oppression against members of LGBTQ community and has led to discrimination and targeting of this community, and thus the members of these communities have been forced to face social stigma, sexual and physical violence, and as well as mental abuse. But over the last 4 decades, the LGBTQIA community has organized itself around the world and fought for their rights. And it all began with the Stonewall Uprising of 1969 in the United States. Back in 1960s, homosexuality was criminalized even in the US. In the year 1969, at Manhattan in New York, at a place known as Stonewall Inn, the police conducted a raid against a homosexual establishment, and several gays, lesbians, and transgenders were targeted. And this episode led the victims to stand up and fight for their rights, which triggered an uprising against police abuse. Following this incident, the next year in 1970, the month of June was chosen to be marked as Gay Pride Month, and the first Pride Parade was initiated to mark the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots, where members of the homosexual community stood up against police abuse and societal violence. Over the years, this movement has gained momentum around the world and has pushed governments and societies to change their views, to accept non binary gender identity and sexual orientation, and this in turn has led to several landmark legal and constitutional changes in several countries. Until recently, in India as well, the LGBTQ community was facing the same situation, as transgenders were not even recognized as a third gender until 2013. And homosexuality in India had been criminalized under the notorious Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code of 1860, which is a colonial era law. This particular legal provision had criminalized even consensual sexual conduct between adults of the same sex. It essentially had criminalized consensual homosexual activity even in private, and it treated homosexuality as unnatural offenses and stated that any voluntary carnal intercourse against the order of nature shall be punishable with imprisonment for life. So, this clearly shows that until recently in India, transgenders didn't have their sexual identity and homosexuals were treated as criminals, thus leading to stigma and abuse against the community. But with the intervention of the Supreme Court, the legal and constitutional landscape has entirely transformed thanks to the Nalsa judgment of 2014 and the Navtej Singh Johar case of 2018. In India, the legal battle against these laws began in 2009 in the NAS Foundation case, where an NGO had challenged the constitutionality of Section 377. In this landmark case, the Delhi High Court had declared Section 377 as unconstitutional, thereby upholding the fundamental rights of homosexuals, and was seen as a landmark judgment. But unfortunately, in 2014, a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court passed an erroneous judgment in the Suresh Kumar case and overturned the ruling of the Delhi High Court in the Nas Foundation case and thereby brought back Section 377 that criminalized homosexuality. This erroneous ruling of the Supreme Court was challenged in the landmark Navtej Singh Johar case, through which the Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality, thus providing for a huge shift in India's legal landscape. But please remember that in the Navtej Singh Johar case, Section 377 was not declared unconstitutional. In fact, Section 377 still continues to remain a part of our legal books and remains a part of the Indian Penal Code. But through this ruling, the Supreme Court declared that consensual homosexual activity between adults done in private is not a criminal offense. So other provisions of Section 377 related to sex with minors, non-consensual sex, rape, or even bestiality or sexual intercourse with an animal, they remain a criminal offense. But however, consensual homosexual intercourse between adults has been decriminalized. These landmark rulings were possible because of the Nalsa judgment that was passed by the court earlier in 2014, and also because of the K.S. Puttaswamy case of 2017, in which the Supreme Court declared right to privacy as a fundamental right. See, first, in 2014, in the Nalsa case, the Supreme Court recognized transgenders as third gender, thereby moving away from the binary interpretation of gender. In the Nalsa judgment, the Supreme Court directed the government to allow people to declare their own identity, and it essentially provided for the right of transgenders to decide their self-identified gender. It directed the governments to grant legal recognition to the third gender, which in itself was a landmark development. Through the Nalsa judgment, the Supreme Court recognized the Yogyakarta principles that were adopted by human rights organizations at Yogyakarta in Indonesia back in 2006-2007. These 10 principles, enshrined under the Yogyakarta principles, they form the very basis of human rights and fundamental rights for transgenders and homosexuals, and at large for the LGBTQIA++ community. So through the Nalsa judgment, by recognizing transgenders as the third gender, the Supreme Court introduced Yogyakarta principles into Indian law, and this brought India's legal and constitutional framework in line with international law that provided protection for the human rights and fundamental rights of the LGBTQIA++ community. Following this, in 2017, the Supreme Court ruled that privacy is a fundamental right enshrined under Article 21 in the landmark K.S. Puttaswamy case. In this ruling, Justice Chandrachud expanded the definition of privacy to cover homosexual activity conducted in private, thus giving it the recognition of a fundamental right as it falls under the purview of right to privacy. It was these two judgments in the Nalsa case and the K.S. Puttaswamy case which led the Supreme Court to evolve India's laws in the Navtej Singh Johar case of 2018 and finally led to the decriminalization of homosexuality under Section 377. But despite these landmark changes that have taken place in the legal and constitutional framework, the writer points out that the community still faces a lot of stigma and suffering. This has affected members of the community to not being able to exercise their rights fully, and the continued discrimination and oppression leads to violence, abuse, and even leads to mental and emotional distress. The writer also points out that the continued stigma prevents members of the community from even accessing basic services like healthcare services, and hence calls for long-term comprehensive solutions to address these issues so that the members of LGBTQIA++ community can fully exercise and enjoy the rights that have been accorded to them. Now let's take up an article from page number 11, which helps us examine the sudden fall in the value of the Indian rupee and the factors responsible for it and how does it affect the Indian economy. Earlier this month, the Indian rupee crossed the 79 per dollar mark, thus marking the lowest value of the Indian rupee ever. Compared to the dollar, the Indian rupee has depreciated drastically in the last few months, and there has been a consistent fall in India's forex reserves, accompanied with a flight of foreign portfolio investments out of India, along with record levels current account deficit for consecutive months, as a result of high level import of gold, fuel items, and coal, along with inability of the exports to catch up, thereby leading to record level current account deficit. See, the Indian rupee has hit an all-time low against the US dollar and has crossed the 79 barrier, thus marking a consistent decline over the last few months. Many experts predict that the rupee will further weaken and depreciate beyond 80 rupees per dollar, and the IMF has estimated that the Indian rupee might depreciate to 94 per dollar by 2029. In fact, the Indian rupee has been witnessing a steady decline over the year and has already lost around 6% against the US dollar since the beginning of 2022. Parallelly, India's forex reserves have also dipped below $600 billion and has plunged by more than $50 billion since September 2021, when the forex reserves hit all-time high of $642 billion. This drop in India's forex reserves is directly a result of RBI's operations in the market to use the forex reserves to support the rupee, as the RBI has burning the forex reserves to address the demand-supply mismatch to hold the rupee at stable levels. See, any volatility in the value of the rupee can affect the macroeconomic fundamentals of the economy. Generally, the thumb rule is that if the rupee depreciates, it is said to be good for exports, as Indian exports will become more competitive. But however, it will take a hit on our import bill, as the import cost will increase and could thus widen the current account deficit. So to bridge the deficit and to address the supply-demand mismatch with regard to rupee and dollar supply, the RBI will have to burn forex reserves, thus leading to a wider impact on the macroeconomic foundation. So ideally, the value of the currency should be stable and the natural market conditions should determine the value of the rupee. So that's the reason why the RBI doesn't aggressively intervene, and as a matter of policy, the RBI has only tried to slow down or smoothen the fall of the rupee rather than try to reverse it or prevent it. Because any such artificial support by the RBI could also be counterproductive and it could hit the foundations of the economy. So the RBI only plays a minimal role in trying to address the demand-supply mismatch and tries to strengthen the rupee, but it can't try to reverse or prevent the depreciation. Because the value of the rupee should be found naturally through market conditions. And for this, the RBI and the government should focus on exports and imports so that there is a fine balance in order to keep current account deficit under check and also ensure sufficient inflow of foreign capital to help bridge this deficit. So the aim of RBI's policy is to allow the rupee to find its natural value in the market without causing unnecessary chaos that could lead to much broader panic in the markets, especially amongst the investors. But every now and then, the RBI does intervene with the help of banks and instructs the state-run banks to sell dollars in the market to balance out the demand and supply equation of dollar and the rupee. If needed, the RBI also uses the forex reserves to push up the demand for the rupee so that it can cushion its fall. So essentially what you need to understand is that the value of any currency is determined by the demand for the currency along with its supply. When the supply of a currency increases, obviously its value drops. On the contrary, when the demand rises for a currency, its value will also rise. So generally, central banks determine the supply of currencies, and the demand for different currencies in the market depends on the amount of goods and services that are produced in the economy. This essentially means that in the foreign exchange market, the supply of rupee is determined by the demand for imports in our domestic economy, and the supply of dollars is determined by the extent of our exports. Let's say there is a very high demand for importing certain products. Then, It could lead to an increase in the supply of rupees in the forex market as traders will use the rupee to purchase more dollars, thus flooding the forex market with the rupee, whereas absorbing the dollar and creating a shortage, thereby increasing the price and value of the dollar. On the other hand, if India's exports are healthy and if this is driving foreign exchange into India, or if the domestic economy is doing very well and if it is attracting foreign investments through the routes of FDI or through FPI into capital markets, then this will increase the supply of dollars in the forex market, thus causing the value of the rupee to rise against the dollar. So the current drop in the value of the Indian rupee against the dollar is a direct result of the mismatch in the demand supply situation. Since March this year, the US Federal Reserve has been increasing benchmark interest rates in order to contain inflation. So as US bonds fetch more returns, foreign capital invested in emerging economies like India has taken flight and is headed towards the US as it provides higher returns. This sudden flight of foreign capital has put pressure on all emerging markets and naturally leads to the depreciation of the local currency against the dollar. Even major reserve currencies like euro and the Japanese yen have depreciated against the dollar, but the Indian rupee has taken a big hit and has hit an all-time low, thus triggering fears of a repeat of the 2013 crisis. Back in 2013, a similar crisis happened when the Indian rupee depreciated around 15% against the dollar in just 3 months because investors pulled foreign capital out of the Indian market and pushed it back towards the US as the US Federal Reserve had increased interest rates as it was trying to absorb excess money in the market that was leading to inflation. Even though the interest rates are still very low in the US, it still provides for very stable returns. And that is what investors prefer in the long run. For example, if you look at the yields on US Treasury bonds, the yield was just around 0.5% in 2020. Now, because of increase in interest rates by the US Fed, the returns have gone up to 3%. And even though it is low compared to the interest rates in the Indian market, it is still stable returns in the long run. And hence, many investors pull out capital from emerging markets to invest it back in the US market. This sudden flight of capital creates a mismatch in the forex market, and this followed by rising imports, especially that of fuel, coal, and as well as gold, has driven up India's import bill, whereas exports, on the other hand, have largely stagnated. So essentially, the current account deficit has gone up significantly, thus forcing the RBI to intervene in the forex market to address the mismatch between the supply of rupee and dollar. So as RBI dips into the forex reserves will dip. But this weakness of the rupee is expected to continue as Indian exports are unlikely to pick up due to low global demand. But the imports will remain stubbornly high because many of the imports are essential supplies for the domestic economy. The prime reason why the rupee has lost its value to the dollar is because in the last few months, the RBI has printed money at a much faster rate than the US Fed in order to deal with the impact of the pandemic. So as easy money flooded the market, inflation went up. And this has further affected every other macroeconomic factor, thus leading India towards this current situation. So following this, the RBI has planned a few steps to stabilize the rupee, and it is looking to liberalize the inflow of foreign capital so that it can boost the country's forex reserves, which could be used to stabilize the rupee. But experts point out that these are only short-term solutions, and the only long-term solution would be to strengthen Indian exports and to keep imports within manageable limits, while parallelly tackling inflation to address the excess supply of rupee in the market. But as long as the current global economic situation continues, and as long as the US Fed continues to keep interest rates high, the situation is unlikely to turn in favor of the rupee. That's the reason why analysts expect the rupee to fall below the 80 mark, and it is even expected that this trend is likely to continue for several years. Now let's take a look at a column from page number 12, which analyzes the Bharat New Car Assessment Program. See, recently on the 24th of June, the Union Minister for Road Transport and Highways, Nitin Gadkari, approved a draft notification for the proposed Bharat New Car Assessment Program or Bharat NCAP. This draft program has been placed in the public domain, inviting comments from the industry and the public, as this program seeks to push the car safety standards in India's automobile industry. Under the Bharat NCAP program, automobile manufacturers will be pushed to promote safety standards in cars through design changes, and they will be mandated to establish the standards through crash tests in line with global standards, following which the vehicles will be provided a star rating that helps buyers in countries around the world to understand the performance of Indian cars in crash tests. The main intention is to boost the export worthiness of vehicles produced in India and to bring them on par with the competition that they face globally. This is also likely to instill consumer confidence with regard to safety, and it aims to make India's automobile industry self-reliant or Atmanirbhar, which could eventually push India to emerge as an automobile hub of the world. Under the new car assessment program, the global standards on car safety and crash tests will be introduced in India as well. And this will help the cars produced in India to gain a foothold in international markets. Because while testing safety standards and while putting a car through crash tests, if the global standards are not followed, then these cars are likely to be rejected in export markets. And hence, it is not just important to follow country specific motor standards, which actually test the roadworthiness of a vehicle, but it is also important to follow the safety and crash standards as laid down by global standards to ensure that cars produced in India are export worthy so that they find acceptance in international markets as well. See, globally, NCAP standards have already been laid out, and countries come up with their own NCAP standards in line with global standards. But some countries also customize them to suit their local context. Because in certain developing and underdeveloped markets, the focus might be on affordability of the car rather than on safety of the car. There are markets where customers and regulators are ready to accept cars with slightly reduced safety features if the cars are more affordable. So India's vision is to cater to both the markets where the safety standards are very high, usually seen in developed countries, while also being able to cater to developing underdeveloped markets where they expect the cars to be more affordable even with slightly compromised safety features. So India's Bharat NCAP program has been designed to align with the global standards while taking into account the local context in certain export markets. So once adopted, these standards will push the car industry to adopt highly intensive crash tests to check the impact of a crash on the occupants at all speeds. And based on the findings, appropriate design changes will have to be incorporated, including changes to the body of the car and as well as the installation of airbags. This would require Indian manufacturers to follow UN Regulation number 94 so that the vehicle safety standards produced in India can be brought up to global safety standards, which plays a critical role in bringing down road accidents and mortality rates. It does impose a cost on the industry as it will have to spend on research and development and also on crash tests, following which it will have to invest in redesigning the cars as well, which might push up the cost of the car itself. But the government is planning to support the industry in this regard so that there is no significant increase in cost while adopting the safety standards so that Indian manufactured cars will become suitable to both developed nations and as well as developing nations. So this could increase the export competitiveness of Indian manufactured cars and could help them find greater acceptance in global markets. Then coming to the last article, a study conducted by Center for Science and Environment, which is an important think tank in the field of environment, has shown that monsoon temperatures are getting hotter than summer temperatures. The study conducted by CSE shows that normal temperature between 1951 and 1980 would show a moderation in the temperature during the monsoon and post-monsoon season due to the impact of rainfall. But shockingly, in the last one decade, that's between 2012 and 2021, the average temperatures during the monsoon season is 0.3 degrees Celsius higher than the average temperatures recorded in the summer season. So essentially, in the last one decade, The post monsoon season, that is, after receiving the rainfall, the temperatures have gotten hotter as compared to the baseline temperature recorded between 1951 and 1980. Along with this, a significant spike in temperature is being noted in the pre monsoon summer season as well. And it shows that average temperatures are expected to go up in the coming years. And especially such persistent high temperatures throughout summer and as well as during monsoon post monsoon season could increase the risk of heat wave conditions, which has already become a significant hazard in the northern and western parts of India. This year itself, northern and western India witnessed record temperatures during the summer, and the study has shown that following the summer season, temperatures don't moderate even during the rainy season. This is possibly a likely indication towards the impact of climate change on global temperatures, and more such studies would be needed to understand the full impact of rising average temperatures and how they influence heat wave conditions. Now let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: despite the landmark judgments of the Supreme Court in the Nalsa case and Navteej Singh Johar case, the LGBTQIA++ community continue to face several challenges in India. Critically examine. The second question: evaluate the domestic and global factors pushing the fall of Indian rupee. How does this affect the Indian economy? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been given in the description box below. So, with this, let's conclude our discussion. And if you found the initiative to be helpful, don't forget to press the like button, share your comments, and do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.